Good morning, everyone. It's now 10 o'clock and this examination hearing is open. These hearings are in relation to examination of the Winchester District Plan 2020 to 2040. My name's Roisin Barrett. I'm a Chartered Town Planner appointed by the Secretary of State to carry out this examination. It's an independent examination. This hearing session and subject to my findings on the plan's legal compliance and subsequent hearing sessions scheduled for April, for the rest of this month, May and June, are part of the examination process, which started with the submission of the plan in November and will end with submission of my report to the council. This is Jill Taylor. She's the programme officer for the examination. She's working independently of the council at my direction and is responsible for all administrative arrangements for the examination. If you've got any queries about the running of the examination or hearing sessions, please have a word with her or email her. Could I please ask a few housekeeping things? Phones off, silent, laptop silent, please. We're not expecting a fire alarm to test today, so if it does sound, it's a real one. And we go out of this door.
Out of these doors, down the fire escape. If there's anybody in the Wickham room, as soon as you go to exit the Wickham room, there is a fire exit directly to your left as soon as you go out the door.
Thank you. The toilet facilities are on this on the floor below. Follow the signs. Now, leads. Yesterday we had quite a few leads, laptop leads, going across areas that people are walking. Please just be careful, and could I ask that at the time that we adjourn and everyone's moving, can you just make sure that you pull them in? Just keep an eye out for it. The other thing is, yesterday, I mean, we're not quite as full this morning, probably we will this afternoon, but when we adjourn, it was quite difficult for me to get out of the room, and it's all because everyone was moving, and it's always a little bit difficult if you're stuck with just one person. So would you just mind? I'll go straight out. I'll make sure I go straight out so that I can get out of everyone's way. Guidance notes, please make sure that you're familiar with those. ED 14, matters, issues and questions, ED 13, 17 and one additional ones. And then the hearing programme, which is a provisional programme and it may be subject to change, ED 15. All were published a few weeks ago. Now I've produced an agenda for this morning's session and the subsequent ones for this week. That was posted on the website. Please go there if you need to see it. Now you'll notice that some questions in matters and issues aren't included. That's because it's not because it necessarily is something I'm not concerned about. It's because I've read all the representations and I don't need any help with that. I want to focus on the things that I really need to hear from people on. My starting point for the examination is the assumption that the council has submitted what it considers to be a legally compliant and sound plan. So those considering that the plan is not legally compliant or sound and seeking changes to the plan have to demonstrate to me why it isn't sound. Now I'm going to be referring my reference points are the tests of soundness, and I'm going to read those out. That's paragraph 35 MPPF. I need to ensure that the plan is positively prepared. That's providing a strategy which as a minimum seeks to meet the area's objectively assessed needs and is informed by agreements with other authorities so that unmet need from neighbouring areas is accommodated where it's practical to do so and is consistent with achieving sustainable development. Justified and appropriate strategy taking into account reasonable alternatives based on proportionate evidence. Effective, deliverable over the plan period and based on effective joint working on cross-boundary strategic matters that have been dealt with rather than deferred, as evidenced by statements of common ground, and consistent with national policy, enabling the delivery of sustainable development in accordance with the policies in the framework and other statements of national policy where relevant. So I want you to point out to me when you're suggesting problems with the plans, which test of soundness you're referring to. So today this session is running until 1 o'clock. We will take a mid-morning break, 20 to 30 minutes, and we should be finished by 1 o'clock. I just want to state my approach to emission sites. Whilst part of my task is to examine the soundness of the approach to the plan's needs, including the sites that are allocated for development, representations to the effect that a site is unsound will be able to be put to me at the relevant hearing sessions. If that person or that organisation has made a request to do so, the council will obviously have an opportunity to respond. Now, sites that are put forward for inclusion in the plan but not selected for allocation are known informally as emission sites. It's not part of my role to examine the soundness of emission sites, and subject to the legal right to be heard, such sites will not normally be discussed. Now, should the situation occur that additional sites are needed, for example, because the spatial strategy or housing requirements or some of these site allocations are found to be unsound, I'll in the first instance look to the council to propose any additional sites and take it through the rigours of the assessment process that it's put in place. Any questions? Any procedural questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
You asked us yesterday to produce a consolidated and slightly more user-friendly schedule of the main modifications and to separate those out from the additional modifications. We have started that process. What we have done is that for each of the policies, we have gathered together all of the proposed main modifications, and we've set them out in tabular form, such that for each policy, where the modifications are to policy, we've set out the whole policy, including
the supporting text.
No, we set out the whole policy and the amendments to the policy, and we've numbered them sequentially. So there are no mods to SP1, but SP2, all the mods have been renumbered MM1 and set out for you in tabular form. Where the changes are to the supporting text, we have merely set out the amended supporting text and not the whole body of the supporting text. Otherwise, the document might become very long indeed.
So you've included the whole policy?
We've included the whole policy, but not the whole of the supporting text.
No, that's fine. But what I want is, you've got one policy, supporting text and policy. I just want 1 MM. That's
exactly what we've done.
And then the usual column, what the amendment is, and the reason for it.
Yes, I think that's what we've done.
Yeah.
The reason for mentioning this now is that we've obviously started but not finished that process. We were proposing to send to you via the programme officer, as it were, what we've done thus far, so that you can be satisfied that the format and content is as you wish it. We'll send that to you now, and if at a convenient moment you could let us know that we're on the right track for what you want, and then we can press on with.
Good idea. And have you included the map changes that we spoke about? The map changes in the plan.
We haven't got that far yet.
We haven't got that far yet.
Okay.
We just thought it'd be wise to send you if it's okay. Just to
No, good idea. And then think about how you're going to deal with those map changes, because that will really clog up an MM schedule, won't it? Because the vast majority is saying the same thing, aren't they? It's the a national park boundary. Okay, thank you for that. That was one of my housekeeping matters. The other thing is the note for the storage, retention and disposal of the recordings and declaration that you're going to accord with GP.
Yeah, thank you. We've been in contact with Fiona Sutherland, our GDPR officer. It seems what the key thing is, and would be steered by yourself, is that the recording's got to be available up to the period of obviously the challenge.
Yes.
And we're happy to put that forward, as long as you are happy that basically it's obviously 6 weeks period of challenge, that the recordings will come down after that period. The GDPR officer was just questioning whether or not that was too short a timetable, but we're happy with that as long as you are, and we can put that
It's
forward.
usually the case that it's
fine.
just the challenge period, isn't it?
Yeah,
So,
so we will put together a note for
Okay,
you
thank
along
you.
those lines. Like I say, GDPR officers confirm.
thank you. And then we had a discussion about the programme. At the moment, if I can just confirm, Wednesday the 4th, we can accommodate that as a virtual session. At the moment, I can't accommodate any changes to the programme in the week 3. We spoke about changes Monday the 19th, 20th, 21st, or that week. At the moment, I can't accommodate anything, I'm afraid, for Tuesday the 20th. So, that's at the moment. If it changes, I'll be in touch. Okay. So yesterday we dealt with legal compliance and procedural matters. Today I want to focus on a number of other matters. And what I explained yesterday is that there are a number of big items that we need to discuss, and so I've tried to phase those through the different hearing sessions. Even if, they're all related, but even if it's a little bit off track. So let's start first of all with my first question, get right to the nub of many concerns, which is the plan period. And now the plan period runs from 2020 to 2040, and you've addressed this head on in your housing topic paper update. So what you say is it starts at 2020 because the council can start the plan period whenever it wishes to, and what you say is that actually that aligns with a number of the evidence-based studies, the needs studies. Okay, however, those have been updated, haven't they? And then you say, well, 2020, and you're quite upfront, you've had a number of years of recent good performance in housing delivery, and therefore that should be taken into account. Now, the complication there, of course, is that it includes past oversupply, and you say actually there's nothing in guidance or policy that says that you can't take into account previous oversupply. However, government guidance is very clear about taking into account, or whether one should take into account, past under delivery, isn't it? That's clear in the PPG, and it says the complication is that the standard method takes into account an affordability adjustment. And what the PPG actually says is the affordability adjustment is applied to take account of past under delivery. The standard method identifies the minimum uplift that will be required, and therefore it is not a requirement to specifically address under delivery. So does logic tell you that the same would be true for over provision against local housing need? Could I just...
If I could perhaps start, just to kind of add additional context to the question. Obviously, we have also, I think it's mentioned in our response to the question, agreed an updated LDS, which was alluded to yesterday on the 12th of February. And we have agreed that, and obviously that LDS basically sets out that we will commence the review basically kind of straight away, and actually it says July to September, and that's every intention that will work, subject to the outcome of obviously this examination. We also put forward proposed modification 3, which was basically in advance of the Chief Planning Officer writing to us, basically asking every local authority to update their LDS. Yeah. And proposed modification 3 obviously says within 6 months. But obviously the LDS kind of supersedes that in a way, but obviously still puts down another marker that we are kind of very clear that we will basically review the local plan straight away. So we do think that context is extremely important, and we're not shying away from that. and obviously that came up yesterday. It does align with obviously the evidence-based studies that basically is in the obviously part of the evidence-based studies, which obviously range from various things from the SMART to the employment studies. And we do feel that there is a strong, obviously, every anticipation that we will basically, subject to the outcome of this examination, adopt the plan this year. So there will be 15 years from date of adoption. So in terms of context, we do feel that that is important. In terms of obviously why we're doing it, yes, we are doing it because there has been strong delivery, particularly in the major development areas in the south. Obviously, some of them are producing very high numbers. So why wouldn't we count those numbers? Because we feel that they are houses being built on the ground. So we do think there's good logic and rationale to start the plan in 2020. But I'll hand to my colleagues if further to add.
Well, the reason that you shouldn't is and many concerns around the table is because it's already been accounted for in the affordability uplift.
Well, Mark, can I just interrupt here, if I may? The guidance, as you know, focuses on under provision and is silent on over provision. So one is entitled to take a holistic view of the position we would suggest. And we did do some what we think is rather illuminating research in the housing topic paper update, paras 3.9 and following, to track and see if there was actually a proper correlation between over delivery and the impact on the affordability ratio. And we came to the view on the basis of the research that we put forward that there really wasn't, and that other factors, in particular interest rates and general economic conditions, were what drove those drove that indicator. And therefore, on that basis, we say that we are entitled, as you know, to choose an appropriate period. There is a starting point based on the evidence base which we put forward, and there's no reason to not include the oversupply as part of the justification for taking that plan period, given that the research shows that there isn't a strong correlation between affordability and
sorry, I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, but the SMAR does show an indication, doesn't it? Because the SMAR says that house price rising has generally decreased. So whilst it's you know, and I've read what you've said in the housing topic update, you've clearly said that you don't think there's a clear link between the standard method calculation and over provision, but that's not, that's confused by the findings of the SMAR, isn't it?
Well, yeah. Do you want to see?
But basically, what it says is that house price rising has decreased.
Yes, but again, the data that's produced to us through the SMAR, if you look at figure 2.3, doesn't suggest that that is a Winchester unique feature. You know, that appears to reflect pretty strongly both regional, county-wide, and national trends. If you look, as I say, at figure 2.3, which is on page 9 of the SMAR, you'll see the lines dealing with affordability ratios over recent years.
Sorry, I'm just going to turn that up.
Yes.
Sorry, can you give me a reference?
One moment.
Don't worry.
It's the July 2024 SMAR update.
Anyone able to help? Just on the reference. Thank you.
Under the evidence-based section.
Yeah.
Yeah, got it. There it is.
Yeah, I'm there. So what's the date of that SMAR?
July 2024.
Right. Okay. I mean, I've read what you've said. Do you think the government takes the same view? Because
Well, the government hasn't expressed the view. That's why we're having this debate. They were settled policy. I say it's. I mean, what one has to say, if there had been a particular impact on the Winchester affordability rate because of the oversupply, one would see a different trend as opposed to Hampshire, South East and England. I mean, have you got, Mum, the figure 2.3 to which I'm referring on page 9? And you can see there at the top of page 9, at least in my paper copy.
Yeah.
And you'll see there that the affordability ratio is the trend is almost identical to both county trend, regional trend, and indeed England trend, national trend. Now, if the effect of the oversupply in Winchester was to be driving down the affordability ratio more than in other areas, one would see that reflected in that line, and it just ain't so. So what we say is that there isn't an element of double counting or anything to suggest that the fact that the affordability ratio is considered in the standard method to suggest that there's anything illegitimate about considering previous oversupply, which in the end is simply a function of the date that's been chosen for the local plan. Now, we're happy to, take the benefit of it, as it were, but the starting point for the local plan date is the evidence base and the fact that we need to secure 15 years from date of adoption, which we do.
Although you're quite upfront, it says, I think it's the second point you make in the housing topic paper. It's that you've had good performance.
Yeah, well, we're not going to look a gift horse in the mouth, but the starting point is the 20-year period and the 15-year period from what we see as date of adoption this year.
Okay. Let's turn to the table, please. Those around the table on the plan. But now I don't want to deal with the end period. I want to deal with the start period, please, of the plan. Who's Mr. Young?
Yes, thank you very much, madam. Yeah, I mean, planning is planning, isn't it? Planning for the future. Not criticising the period because it can cover the 15 years from adoption this year if that happened, but to rely so heavily on the previous 5 years is just counterintuitive. That's not planning. That is accounting. This plan is an audit rather than anything else. So yeah, it seems completely inappropriate. Can I just address you on the affordability issue? I agree with you. I think the evidence shows that house price inflation is being curtailed by the delivery, which is the same as showing there is a relationship. But just more broadly, I mean, it's tiresome, isn't it, to have to argue with the council about demand and supply. If you provide more houses and deliver a lot of affordable houses, which you can certainly achieve on greenfield sites in areas like this, the council's policy is 40%. Of course, you're going to impact on affordability. It's just nonsensical to suggest you don't. I'll just give you 2 bits of anecdote. The Times, the newspaper, ran a story about 2 years ago where they'd noticed house price inflation of about 20% in a year in York, famous for not having a plan. Whereas where I live, just on the edge of Tewkesbury, where they produce huge numbers of housing, enormous allocations, house prices fell by 1%. There is an obvious and direct correlation between the amount of housing, and interestingly in Tewkesbury, they deliver a lot of affordable housing. And that has a really cathartic and beneficial effect on house prices, because what you're doing is you're taking a lot of people who might otherwise be in the rented sector and chasing all those rented properties, and you take them out of the market, and you take the heat out of the private sector rented market, And yeah, of course, nobody, no existing homeowners like to think their house prices are decreasing. The planning system helps cause them to rise all the time, but there is a direct correlation. You build more houses, the figures I was talking about yesterday, 35,000, you build 35,000 houses the next 15 years in Winchester, there's no way on earth the house prices will not be affected. Of course they'll be affected. So yeah, it's disappointing that we had this debate yesterday. It's disappointing that the council are not planning positively going forward. What is the point in including your existing allocations? It's interesting, isn't it? Where's the key diagram in this plan showing us perhaps where the major allocations are that aren't the existing commitments? There's a complete lack of positive planning and a complete lack of vision. There is a reference to vision in the plan itself, but there's a lack of vision about planning for the future. And we talked yesterday, very, very minimal allocations in Winchester. I think one greenfield site for 150 houses. That's 1% in your completely significant dominant town. It's laughable. And,
Okay.
I don't mind saying that because I've done plans. I've been in Mr. Fraser Urquhart's position. I've done the South Worcestershire plan, 29,000 houses, allocations of 4 and 2,000 homes at a time. The Worcester plan at the moment, there's examination there 2 weeks ago, 10,000 houses in a new settlement around the railway station. That's planning. This isn't. This is just an audit.
Okay, thank you. House Builders Federation.
Thank you, Mark. House Builders Federation, Home Builders Federation, I should say.
Sorry,
No,
sorry.
I've been there 7 years and I've just got it wrong. So
The
it's
water jug was in the place.
yes, it's far friendly. Sorry. In terms of this position, obviously, we also look at this in matter 4. So in terms of the situation, in terms of the plan period as well, and when the period should start from. I think agree. Exactly with what colleagues just said, Ms. Young's just said with regard to that, in terms of that, clearly there is a link between supply and demand, and there's also the question of there's counterfactual. So if you don't know what would have happened without those homes being come forward and whether it would have been higher in terms of that, so there's those elements there. What we do know is what planning policy and practice guidance said with regard to the standard method. I think that's reflected. I'll point you, Ma'am, to Inspector's decision in the East Cambridge local planning single issue review and paragraph 35 of that report. I haven't included, but I'm happy to send that report through to you for inclusion, Ma'am. And that says, through the application of the standard method to calculate LHN and establishing a new dwelling requirement for 2022 to 2031, it is no longer necessary to set out a dwelling requirement for the years to 2022. That was in relation to oversupply, but I would argue that the same must be true if you're looking at that was regard to undersupply, but the same must be true in terms of oversupply. You
That
can't
was
have
looking at undersupply.
that was undersupply.
Yeah, no,
So
no, I
it's
know.
slightly different in terms of that regard, but we can't have one set of local plans saying actually we're going to dismiss any undersupply for the period prior to the plan being prepared and coming forward on the basis of the standard method, and then saying another plan, oh, do you know what, we're going to include that oversupply. It doesn't resonate, and it's a difficult one to square in terms of squaring the circle, whatever the metaphor you choose to use, Ma'am, in terms of that. So I think it. And the inspector goes on to say, to be effective and consistent with national policy, the dwelling requirement should be rebased to 2022. And that was the point at which they'd assessed that need. So it was clear that there was a rebasing going on within that. In terms of the argument about the evidence base, the evidence base has been reviewed. And there is in the SHMA, has been reviewed and that's been updated to 2024. Paragraph 3.31 of that site said site need for 411 affordable homes between 2023 and 2040. So the evidence base has been updated to that point and rebased. The employment land, again, that's looking at 2023 base and looked at jobs growth from 2022 to 2040. So there isn't an update to the evidence base to a period that includes that. So surely you would look at the evidence, the plan period from the point at which the evidence. So even on the council's own argument and justification, it doesn't seem to equate with what they're evident. You update evidence, and that takes the transport evidence. It was updated in 2024. It includes 2020, but that will include the development that's included and has been accounted for from 2020. So you could look at it. So there isn't that logical point at which to say, oh yeah, we'll just choose 2020. And the council have said it's to look a gift horse in the mouth. It's to ensure that they don't have to deliver as many homes from 2024 to the end of the plan period. It is as Mr. Young said, it's an accounting approach rather than a positive approach. Say, actually, we're looking forward from the point at which we assess those needs. How can we meet those needs moving forward? Rather than saying, actually, you know what, we'll go to 20. Why not go back to 2018? Why not? You know, it's the logic points to the evidence and the policy and the planning practice guidance on the standard method. It is yes, it is silent, but it's not silent in terms of the standard method, Mark. And I think that's the point we've taken.
I mean, that's the complication, isn't it?
It is.
That's the complication, the application of the standard method that looks forwards, whereas you look back.
Yeah.
O'Flynn Group, please.
Thank you. I think just a few points to add to that. So Mr. Fox referred to the context being important. So in other words, one shouldn't take a sort of dogmatic, narrow view of the method of the standard method and how it's calculated in the period. You need to look at the context. Well, the context is that the alleged over delivery from 2020 is on sites that were a number of sites that were allocated in the last plan specifically to deal with wider strategic needs from the Partnership for South Hampshire area, and there is still unmet need within the wider system. So if you take that context, what would a positively prepared plan be seeking to do? It would seek to say, well, yes, we provided more homes than a sort of reductivist view of the number would suggest for that period, but clearly they were allocated for purposes relating to unmet need. There is still unmet need. What therefore is the appropriate thing to do in light of what the NPPF is seeking to achieve? And that's in a sense where the council's approach falls down. On the evidence-based point, you're taken to figure 2.3 of the SHMA, which I've now managed to lose out, and that shows affordability ratios in Winchester, Hampshire, the southeast, and England, and purports to show a sort of generally sort of similar pattern. I mean, respectfully, that's really a meaningless analysis. What house prices and affordability ratios are driven by, and you can look at the OBR working paper on house price forecasts and elasticities, is essentially four things: incomes, demographics, in other words, how many people there are, access to credit, and the supply of homes. So unless you had a correlation analysis with all four of those metrics across all four of those geographies, and you then carried out the assessment to say what the relationship was or wasn't, then you might have a meaningful analysis, albeit one should really be looking over a sort of longer period for this anyway. But even if one takes a narrow view, table 2.3, a page above, shows that in the period 2018 to 2023, compound annual growth rates for house prices in Winchester were lower than Hampshire, the southeast, and England. So,
sorry, where are you? Fig 2.3.
Sorry, table 2.3. That's on page 7 of the SHMA update. So,
yeah,
if one concluded that the affordability ratio hadn't improved more in Winchester, well, perhaps that's because wages were increasing, or there were other factors going on relating to the population demand. So, I mean, regretfully, council's position on this just doesn't stack up. And I think, in a sense, the most illuminating point we had was the reference to gift horse. The gift horse is the ability to argue that the council in this plan should provide less housing. Now that goes to what is the motivational driver of the judgments being made in this plan, and that the gift horse remark is.
And the council's been quite upfront about that.
Yes, absolutely. But
no, I don't think we're arguing about that.
No, but
Okay.
one has to step back and say, you know, your question, well, why is this unsound? It goes to the Para 35 tests of soundness about being positively prepared, meeting needs in the context of unmet needs as well. You know, that is part of the very nub of this. And this approach is almost very small and technical, but almost the biggest illustration of the failure of this plan.
Okay.
To do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms Mulliner?
Thank you, Ma'am. It is just worth having a look at what the PPG says, an IDT 2A006, specifically with respect to the affordability adjustment and why it's applied to the standard method. And it specifically says it responds to price signals and is consistent with the policy objective of significantly boosting the supply of homes. The approach the council is taking is inconsistent with that because it doesn't significantly boost. What it does is offset from previous years, and it's actually suppressing supply in a way in which isn't expressly allowed for by the PPG or the MPPF. And I think it is worth saying that whilst oversupply isn't referenced specifically, if the government had wanted this approach to be taken, it would have said so, and it would have said, right, from 2018, when the standard methodology was introduced, you look at it year on year, and you look at what you've delivered, and you work it out then from your plan period. But it doesn't say that. It actually says that you have a standard method number that you can rely on for 2 years through the examination process. So there is no provision to backward look, whether it's under delivery or oversupply. It just doesn't allow for that to be taken into consideration. And it is, and just because it is consistent with that policy objective of significantly boosting, without that, you end up having a situation where you don't significantly boost, and actually the standards methodology becomes fairly redundant if you start doing that and you start looking back. I mean, what does it mean? What's the purpose of it? It is just entirely redundant in its methodology.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, can I put to the council? It is of concern. What if I were to come to the conclusion that the plan period, for all the reasons that we've heard, would not be justified? What's the implications for the plan?
Can I address that? Can I just say though, this whole issue has come about because the council isn't denying that housing delivery can benefit affordability in the long term, and the housing, the strategic housing market assessment acknowledges that. But the argument from the other side, where this all started, was this is already taken into account in the standard method, and it's double counting for you to include it. Now, I know they object to us including it at all,
yeah,
but it was the double counting thing in particular. And so the house prices are one element of the affordability ratio. And what we were showing is that the affordability ratio isn't directly affected by the delivery of housing. We're not trying to argue that there won't be some benefit in affordability terms.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, you know, you could start the plan period from, I think most people are suggesting 2024, as that's when the most recent figures date from. But we would still be arguing it's reasonable to take account of the good delivery that there's been. The other side talk about plan needs to be positive. Well, you've got, since 2020, you've had a standard method requirement that's been in the 600s. We've had delivery between 800 and 1,000 a year. that is positive. We think that can and should be taken into account. And you can guarantee that if there'd been a shortfall, then our colleagues on the other side would be saying, well, despite the PPG saying it's not a requirement to take account of that, you should lose. So we say, well, the PPG doesn't even say anything about over delivery. So what is the harm in taking it into account? I mean, the effect would obviously be that over provision, which I think from memory is about 1,400, would go. We would say we would still be meeting the standard method requirement for the plan period. That would impact on the unmet need allowance, unless you ask us to look for additional sites. I have looked at what it would mean in terms of 5-year land supply on adoption, and there would still be more than 5 years supply
on the basis of
on our basis.
Yeah.
Even if you took that over provision out and sort of started from 2014. But, you know, we just don't believe that's the right way, and we don't believe that PPG is telling us not to count that.
So you said 1,400. Did you? 1,400. I sort of made it 1,250, something around that.
It might be. I was just.
Oh, okay. So what you're saying is that it would impact. It would obviously impact the numbers, but you would still be able to meet local housing needs, calculated as.
We would still be able to meet the standard method at 676 a year. But yes. In terms of 5-year land supply, we still provide an unmet need allowance and meet the 5-year land supply, but obviously the whole plan figure would go down. The 1,400 I referred to, the under or over provision, is in table 1.
Oh, the 1,400 includes the over provision, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah,
sorry.
that is the over
Sorry.
provision.
Yeah. I get it.
Above what the standard method sought. So there is a table in the housing topic paper update that sets that out, table 1.
Okay. Does anybody else wish to say anything else on this? Mr. Young?
Yeah, just briefly then, just looking at the terminology in the MPPF and the planning practice guidance, as far as paragraph 22 is concerned, it refers to strategic policies should look ahead.
Oh, yeah. Oh, right. Okay.
Sorry.
No, carry on. I'm going to deal with the end period.
No, I don't talk about it.
No,
Yeah,
okay.
I know it says 15, but what I'm emphasising is you should look ahead at how are allocations from a previous plan and going back 5 years, looking ahead. Now that's the pinnacle of policy, the MPPF. Look ahead over a minimum of 15 years to anticipate and respond to long-term requirements and opportunities. And then if we go to the PPG right at the start, so obviously the PPG on plan making, says in paragraph 1, second sentence of the first paragraph of that, plans should set out a vision and a framework for the future development of the area. It's all about the future. This is a bit like when we're in the Supreme Court arguing over paragraph 49 and the Supreme Court judges sent a note out which caused a lot of confusion and worry for the barristers, which was, what is the statutory basis for the MPPF? And nobody knew because it was so obvious that it's just relied upon. And the conclusion was that it was inferred from reference to the MPPF and other bits of legislation. It's surely inferred from the MPPF and the PPG that plans look forward. And it says so, rather than going back 5 years. It just makes no sense. And I've had a look at the submission plans, so SDO 5, and I'm looking at local plan allocations at Winchester, and I'm looking at sites that have already got planning permission. I mean, why are they in there as supposed allocations when they're already commitments in the case of Barton Farm I think it goes back 2 plans and is half built out, despite the Secretary of State tripping over his own lawyers over the RSS issue. So, no, completely counterintuitive to rely on such a period. I agree, you could go back to the start of the most relevant standard method figure applicable through the 2023 version of the NPPF, but you don't go back to 2020. That makes absolutely no sense at all. You've got
sorry, can I be clear? When are you saying the plan period should start then?
I think in line with what the Home Builders Federation said, I think because the process takes time, I don't think it's wrong to say you look back 2 years from the point of adoption. So if adoption is at the end of this year, let's imagine that scenario, then 2023, because there's obviously plan preparation time. You've got to be reasonable, but not going back to 2020. That is, I mean, everybody says it, gift horse in the mouth, and you say, well, they're being honest about that. Yeah, they're being honest about the fact they've produced a plan which largely relies on existing commitments. Is that the right thing to do? No, it's absolutely not the right thing to do. It's the wrong thing to do.
Okay, thank you. When did plan making process start on this plan?
The actual launch of the local plan started in 2018. We did obviously the SIP consultation basically in 2021. We were going to try and do it in 2020, but COVID hit. And obviously that was a period of 2 years. So, and obviously we've done 4 rounds of consultation as well to basically be inclusive as possible, because the obviously the City Council wanted to consult on the strategic options first of all as a bespoke consultation. That was obviously the SIP. Like I say, we commenced it in 2018, and obviously, you've got to bear in mind again the strategic transport assessment takes a minimum of 12-14 months to do. So there is a time lag, and obviously if you're trying to basically just go back 2 years, I don't think that's enough time to basically take into account everything that needs to be done to get you towards submission. Myself, having been in local plans for I don't know how many years, it's phenomenal the amount of work you have to do to basically get it to submission. I don't think 2 years is enough.
Yeah, well, of course, the PPG does say that housing need figures should be calculated at the start of the plan making process and kept under review for 2 years, doesn't it, from the time the plan's submitted for examination, so it can be relied upon for 2 years.
And we have changed, obviously, when we looked at the plan period, because of obviously the delays that we had, basically anything from obviously the government changing housing figures to COVID, etc. We did look at changing the plan period. I know we had lots of discussions with our councillors about the end date. And obviously we started, I think, to 2038, and then we extended it 2040. So we have moved, and we have lost some of the supply, because basically the plan has taken a long gestation to get to where we are now. So we have flexed and moved the end date of the plan period. We've not been shy about that, to obviously maintain the 15 years of adoption.
Okay. O'Flynn?
Thank you. To one, a reference back to our hearing statement to para 215. Actually, it's a matter 4 hearing statement. Para 215 was the reference the government made in its consultation document on the draft NPPF that said, given the chronic need for housing we see in all areas, we should celebrate strong delivery records without diluting future ambitions. And they did that in the context of removing the reference to past oversupply in a sort of 5-year land supply context. So that's the sort of the mood music. So diluting future ambitions is on a strong track record is essentially what this plan's seeking to do. On the point around needs, we've got para 63 in the NPPF, which says, so just for context, 61 refers to using the standard method. Shall I go back? So yeah, 61 refers to the standard method, and then 60 says To support the objective of significantly boosting the supply, it's important sufficient amount of right of land and that the needs of groups with specific housing requirements are addressed. And the overall aim should be to meet as much of an area's identified housing need as possible, including with an appropriate mix of housing types for the local community. 63 then says, within this context of establishing need, the site type and tenure of housing needed for different groups should be assessed and reflected in planning policies. These groups should include, and not limited to, those who require affordable housing and then families with children, So affordable housing need is part of the sort of matrix for determining the number of homes that are provided for in the plan and in the interpreting the evidence on need. The SHMA update at para 319 does that assessment for affordable housing need, and it does it from 2023 and sets an annual rate for 2023 to 2040. Now, what the council are effectively doing is saying that some of the people in affordable housing need now or from 2023 will have their needs met by homes that are already being built, because they're diluting the future level of housing that they would otherwise provide. So, you know, even on that basis, it's not consistent with a reading of para 60 through to 63 of the framework in terms of how a plan is supposed to interpret the evidence on need in the round.
Get the point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Foreman?
Yes, thank you. Just a quick point in line with Mr. Young's suggestion of the 2023 start date. That would take account of the push spatial position statement, the latest that's been published by them.
Okay, anybody else?
Quick point. Just to have it confirmed to you that the work on this plan started in 2018. That's what I understood. Well, then how on earth did the plan never grapple with the unmet needs of the South? You know, whatever the position about whether it's 10,000 or 40,000, how on earth could it not have grappled with that over a period of 7 years?
Okay, we heard about that yesterday, didn't we? Okay, can I put it to the council, please? You've heard the concerns. Have you got any response? I'm going to have to go away and think about this. I haven't come to a clear conclusion.
I mean, are you proposing to move on to the end date?
Oh, yes.
Discussion?
Oh, absolutely. Sorry,
So,
have you got anything that in response to the comments that have been made? Have you got anything that you want to? I'm going to move on now to the end date.
yes, I mean, there's just again one general point to make. There's a lot of focus upon the fact that in providing for the need that is established by the standard method in Winchester, the appropriate MPPF, that a lot of that need is met by provision that's coming forward from sites which have been allocated in the earlier plan or plans.
Mm-hmm.
2 points. One is a matter of fact, to correct, I think, something that was said by Flynn, Mr. Sprite Flynn. That wasn't something which was allocated for wider South Hampshire need. Those were allocated for with Winchester needs in mind. And we simply said that there's nothing wrong, and indeed it would be bizarre, frankly, to disregard the fact that there are homes coming forward to meet that need. It doesn't matter when or where they were allocated. What matters is that they're coming forward to meet that need. And so, of course, one should take account of those. And it's not negative, or to use a double negative, it's not positive to have regard to that fact. It's just a simple understanding of the development that's coming forward, and coming forward in a balanced and sustainable way. Because again, one must always bear in mind that that's what's got to be achieved.
Okay.
And so I say it's been such a strong focus of the, particularly some of the more rhetorical submissions, that one has to focus on that. And again, we go back to the simple point, again, in response to some of the more anecdotal submissions that have been made, that somebody once said the plural of anecdote is not data. Many an anecdote does not make data. And if you look, don't want to repeat myself, you look at this, the data actually shows about the period, not from 2018, but from 2020 onwards, when there's been that oversupply, you don't see dramatic effect on the on the affordability ratio. And also, again, to respond just briefly to a point that Mr. Spry made about what's said in the government consultation, what matters is what emerges as a result of that consultation. And it remains the case that there is no government policy dealing with oversupply, and therefore you've got to go back and look at the facts, and that's what we put before you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the end date. And of course, para 22, which was referred to previously, said that strategic policies, what does it say? Strategic policies should look ahead over a minimum of 15-year period from adoption. Concerned that you actually won't have 15 years from adoption as we go through the examination process. Could the councillor just comment on that?
Well, obviously, subject to the outcome of this examination, we feel that we can do, obviously, consultation on the main modifications within the time frame, and go to, I've got delegated authority to basically go out to consultation. I don't need to go back to Cabinet or full council. So I can do that basically pretty much straight away as we can, and go out to consultation, obviously share those responses with yourself. And obviously, subject to that, we've got no problem going to basically full council to adopt the plan before the end of the year. I don't foresee a problem with that because I've got all the delegation in place.
Okay, anybody got any comments on that? I don't need as much help on this one. Okay.
There's just one additional point to make, ma'am, which is a point of fact for you, which is that a not dissimilar situation arose in Chichester, and the Chichester decision letter. You're obviously aware of it because
Yes.
you nod.
People are quoting other examinations.
Yes.
I am aware of most of them.
I'm anxious not to, because everyone obviously is different, but this one is quite pertinent. And there are two facts. First, that 14 and a half years was deemed acceptable on its face. And also, and this is something to an extent of the elephant in the room in this case too, is that they are also proceeding under the transitional provisions. There's going to be an early review. That early review will obviously go out much beyond the 15-year period. And in that context of early review coming, that a 14.5-year period, we don't think we'll need that. But even if we do, that was found acceptable at Chichester.
Okay, we'll look at the review, and we heard various comments on immediate review, etc. yesterday. But okay, let's take a break. It's now coming up to 11 o'clock. Let's adjourn until 20 past, and then we'll come back. Thank you very much. This hearing is now resumed. Just housekeeping matter. Thank you very much, council, for the MM schedule. Yeah, just looked at it. Yes, that's absolutely fine. No need to include the whole policy unless you want to. I mean, it's up to you how you do it, but just make it a very long document. Just the key thing is to make sure that any MMs, there's one per policy and supporting text. That's the key thing. Okay. Thank you.
Just one line, if I can. Is it okay if we number them at the end? Because otherwise we can start numbering them now, but obviously whether or not we have any additional ones as we go. Like, it's just in terms of timing. We just wondered whether or not we produce the document and then just put an MM 1, 2, 3, or we can start numbering them now and add in any other ones as we go. But
sorry, so what's your suggestion?
So let's say we can put the document together.
Yeah.
That's not a problem.
But we need to be able to refer to them, don't
Yes,
we? And all know that we're talking about the same thing.
So we're quite happy to just number them as they go. It's just obviously if anything else cropped up through the examination process relating to a policy, the MMN number wouldn't be sequential, if you see what I mean.
No,
But is that a problem or?
really.
Okay,
You can
thank
put
you
an
very
A or
much.
a B or
Yeah.
work it out somehow, so that it doesn't muck the whole thing up. But we need to know exactly what we're talking about, don't we? So yeah. Okay.
Just one other matter of housekeeping, Mum. You asked us, Mr. Opeshish in particular, what would be the effect of.
I was going to pick up on that. I've been thinking about it in the adjournment, obviously, and I was going to pick up on that at the end of this session. But if you have had thoughts, please.
Well, you will see Mr. Opeshish is not here. That's because he's downstairs number crunching. So we have to have a slightly more nuanced.
Okay, so let's I've had a bit of time to think. I'm going to think about it. I'm not going to come to a decision on this immediately. That would be helpful.
Yes.
Very helpful, but we can pick up at the end of the session if we say if he.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, anything we put in is to assist you and without prejudice to our primary case. Which you're also thinking
I
about
totally understand that.
for obvious reasons. Yeah.
Let's move on then. So SP2, and you've suggested a main modification, and that's in relation. We've spoken about the review of the plan and the transitional arrangements to in place, and I've tossed around whether, in view of the transitional arrangements, indeed whether a review of the plan is needed or not, but I've come to the conclusion that it would be. So we're all agreed, and you're agreed that it would be within less than 80% of local housing needs, etc. And of course, it doesn't give any clear time scale, or it doesn't give a consequence. Could you answer both those queries? Is a time scale required? Thank you, Mr. Amy. A time scale, and you know what we're talking about, a time scale for review. So you've said when it will start. Do we have to speak about adoption, and do we have to speak about consequences? Those are the two queries.
Yes, sure.
Thank you.
So I hope all participants have seen the proposed modifications PM2 and PM3, which look to adding in text to policy SP2 regarding the production of a replacement or review plan, and supporting text to go along with that. That was published, and that's part of the submission documents. Since then, of course, things have moved on a little with the chief planner's letter to authorities about cracking on with, authorities in our position, which has resulted in the council adopting a new local development scheme. So now we have dates, whereas we didn't have quite those dates and that position before. So at present, we have a proposed modification that talks about commencing review within 6 months, and we've already discussed yesterday, I believe, that we're looking to start the technical work on that earlier this summer, no matter what. At the moment, the proposed mod is as is, but we could fully understand the inclusion of the dates in the local development scheme in that to give some more flesh on the meat on the bones, if you like, for how we envisage to take the plan forward in terms of commencement, the full Reg 18 consultation. Forgive me, I'm using the old numbers, but anyway, the first consultation, the second consultation, and adoption. So we think, first of all, a modification is necessary, and we think we can and should do a bit more detail than the one that you have in front of you. With regards to consequences, we read the other participants' statements here, and in terms of, a lot of the question is about, well, where did the teeth come in? What's the consequence here? I think for our part, we look at the transition period, transition arrangements in the MPPF. with response to both plan making but also decision making under section 78 and the inclusion of the buffer from next year of 20%. We know that for some participants that's not enough, but for our part we think that the government has put in place transition arrangements that it deems appropriate. This is clearly one of the situations that they consider would arise, a plan in our case, and we don't see the need to go beyond that and, for instance, say that the policies applying to housing are out of date, for instance, as some have suggested. We think that we fall under the transition arrangements. Clearly, we think that's sufficient teeth, and we don't think it's appropriate, given the point of producing this plan is to deliver a plan-led proposal, that we should do that. And also, we are mindful that, frankly, this story will play out in terms of national policy, and there may well be other amendments to the MPPF in the future that may or may not impact on Winchester's position. And we think that that remains something that is in the government's gift to do. But we don't see the need for us to prejudge any future action by government by putting in a commitment now that the housing supply policy should be out of date in a certain timetable. So that's our thinking.
Okay, so what you're saying, it's in government policy at the moment, that may be subject to change. You're subject to the transitional arrangements, and you've got your LDS in place, and you've suggested the way in which it could be modified. Okay, I don't want to rehearse the argument about whether a review is appropriate or not to mend a plan I know that many of you are saying is unsound. So let's park that one. I don't need to hear that, but has anybody got any comment on this? I had quite a lot of representations in writing. Mr. Clement?
I think, well, yes, I won't labour the point because you have our representations. We are of the view that the modification requires teeth and it requires sanction, clearly, because we've discussed how long this plan has taken to get to where it is now. There have been LDSs before, clearly, with dates in them, but they lack teeth. And the propensity for drift to occur is very real, and there is evidence of that happening in Winchester. So we have to avoid that. So I think from our point of view, I won't go over the polishing the proverbial point, but yes, we think that there is a requirement for teeth to be here. We provided an example of the examining inspector, Inspector Bridgewater, at the Spelthorne plan with our submissions. They may not have reached you, Ma'am, because they were shown as an appendix to the matter statement. But there was a recommendation for an immediate review and for the plan to be submitted within 2 years. Probably a pertinent submitted for examination. Yes, ma'am. Okay. I did send the example through. Mm-hmm. The pertinent point there was that plan was achieving 79% of local housing need. This plan is achieving less than 56%. What the council is doing is proceeding in accordance with the letter of the transitional provisions, but not the spirit of what's happening.
Oh, sorry. So 56% of the new
local housing need for Winchester.
24 local housing.
Yes.
Need. Okay. Okay.
So I think, Ma'am, it's yes, we are proceeding. Mr. Young has made the point that this plan isn't planning. We don't believe it is. To give it a life that could go beyond a very clear and obvious sanction, I don't think is in anyone's interest.
Okay, so what are you suggesting?
As we had said, that if a review mechanism is required, that should have the point, as we suggested in our representations, that the policies should fall out of date if it's not adhered to.
Is that not in government policy already?
No.
Could you explain that, please?
Well, the basically, if the plan is not submitted for examination, what I'm saying.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
In accordance with the modification and the timetable, then the policy.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay. Yeah, I
Thank you, Mark.
understand. For O'Flynn.
A similar point to Mr. Clemens, only to add that if you rely on the 20% additional buffer on 5-year land supply of an already low number, so 56% of the new standard method for Winchester, but in the context, as we all heard extensively yesterday, about even greater levels of unmet need, it sort of doesn't really touch the sides. Of
So this is the, sorry, 5 years supply for decision making.
As I understood Mr. Ayling's point, he said, well, we don't need a sort of bite in the policy because we're going to be hit by the transition arrangements in the MPPF, which applies the 20% buffer for 5-year land supply to the local plan housing requirement figure. Mr. Clemens' point is, well, that's a really quite small, 56% of the new standard method, so 20% doesn't reach that, but it does even less proportionately in terms of the scale of unmet need that's clearly there now and is going to be bigger now. So it's not a sufficient remedy for making early movement towards achieving proposals to address this higher level of need overall. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bellway, please.
Thank you, Mark. Just a quick point, and just refer to East Borough Council and neighbouring local planning authority, which has similar constraints, similar opportunities.
Sorry, who is this?
East Borough Council, ma'am.
Yeah.
Member of Bush. Their local plan was adopted with concerns in April 2022. They were required to prepare an early review by April 2023. They missed that deadline. They did a token effort call for sites in autumn 2023, issues and options in December 2024, and we're anticipating Reg 18 in December 2025. It just paints the picture, and Winchester's local plan for 7 years, it's been a tortuous route, and COVID is not an unreasonable excuse, by the way, but we've got perhaps local government reorganisation ahead, timetables slip. And Mr. Fox said yesterday that, you know, a 12-month strategic transport assessment, quote, and then this morning, a phenomenal amount of work. So I do think a timetable is essential because we need to hold feet to fires. Thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Ayling has suggested a timetable, hasn't he? Okay, thank you. Mr. Gately?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Wiseman actually raised the comparative example.
Sorry, Mr. Gately, would you mind using your microphone?
Yes.
Thank you.
I was just going to add on the Eastleigh point that the Mr. Wiseman raised, their adoption date is a full 7.25 years on from the inspector's report. So 2029 would be the point at which they adopt a plan in the context of South Hampshire's pressing requirement when the inspector required a quotes early review. So it, again, just to reinforce that point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Young?
Practical effect of what does this look like? It's say in 2 years' time. What the council will be able to rely upon, as you know, is paragraph 78 of the MPPF in the current version. It hasn't changed in the earlier versions, where you can rely on your local housing or your local plan number for 5 years. So they'll be arguing that. They'll say, well, we haven't done a review that we said we'd do within 2 years or submit it within 2 years. But they'll be able to rely upon the MPPF, allowing them to rely on this figure, which is 500 below the current local housing need figure. So what you're doing is perpetuating the wrong number for 5 years as a minimum. You introduced a review, you know my views about a review, or certainly Kevin Ward's views about a review, but they'll run that argument. They'll run that argument because, why do I know that? Because I do appeals and that's what's said. We're allowed to rely on this figure for 5 years.
Okay. Home Builders Federation. Sorry, I'll take you first, then sorry, would you mind putting your nameplate so that I can see it? Thank you very much.
Sorry, really, I won't want to repeat the points that have been made. I think the one to look at there is obviously a lot of our, or at least our representations reflected on the Bedford Local Plan 2030, which was the inclusion of the review period with teeth, and that is one of the few local plans that did come forward under the expected timetable within that review.
Sorry, which plan?
Sorry, the Bedford Local Plan
Yeah,
2030,
yeah.
in which the one where actually the council did meet the timetables and requirements set out within their review because of the teeth, because it would have impact. So I think that is where you see an effective review policy that has actually achieved what was set out within that
And that
policy.
set out an adoption date.
That sets out an adoption, not an adoption date, a submission date. And I
Submission
think
date.
this is the case with the Spelthorne, is that it's about submission date. So again, what the council was saying in terms of including more detail, I would suggest that a submission date is important alongside that that teeth, showing that actually this is what will happen should that submission date not be achieved. I think looking again at Spelthorne and really reflecting what was said before about Spelthorne would really have an impact. I was at the hearings there. Their 5-year land supply is quite tenuous, so actually the 20% will have a significant impact on their supply. So it is a real impetus for them to get forward and produce a new plan. Whereas I don't think that would necessarily be the case in Winchester. So I think that's another point to reflect on why Spelthorne have a submission date, but not necessarily the teeth within that policy itself, and why the inspector did consider it necessary.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gladman, please.
Thank you. I'll keep it very brief, other than because I've gone last in this. I just endorse everything that's been said through all the other participants. Everyone beat me to it, basically.
I'm sorry. Would you mind using the microphone? Sorry, the acoustics isn't that.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was just wanted to endorse everything that's been said by all participants going last. Everyone beat me to it on that point.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, you've heard Mr. Ayling or whoever on the point of the amendment that you're suggesting to bring in a review, and you've heard what they've said about the teeth of it.
Okay, can I just make a general point?
Yes.
The first is that all of the points that have been made will have been well known to the government when they drafted the transitional provisions in the new NPPF, and there's been no suggestion either in the transitional provisions or by way of amendment to paragraph 11 that there needs to be the kind of powers set out in these various suggested amended modifications to the policy to give it teeth, as it's called. And secondly, if there is delay, and particularly if there's any element of feet dragging to that, then that will be capable of being deployed at individual appeals to suggest that on an ad hoc basis that the policies are out of date. And that, we say, is a far better way actually of ensuring that there isn't delay, rather than some blanket policy which may be completely inappropriate as things move forward.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Ayling? No?
Nothing to add, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. So now we move on. SP2 obviously sets out figures, and we know government policy significantly boosts the supply of housing. Those numbers aren't stated, and it's actually a point throughout the plan. They're suggested as about, I seem to remember. Should they be minimums? They're not stated as maximums. That's very, very clear. Should they be minimums? And the wider point about significantly boosting the supply of housing.
Sure. So we and this does, if our answer was sort of thinking also not only for this policy but also the allocations in
throughout the plan. It's a point throughout the plan.
Yes. We're mindful of the government aim to boost housing supply, but we're thinking about what's the right way in which to cast the sites and the approach in this plan. We understand people think that it should be minimum. It's inconsistent. It's consistent with their other submissions to this process and all of that. And yet, when we actually think about what is the right level of development to come forward on each site, we find that about is a much better way of understanding the potential of the site rather than set a minimum, which you then have to then becomes, if you like, a slightly more less flexible approach. You then perhaps start to get into thinking, well, I really need to completely bottom this out. Whereas about does allow for a little flexibility for sites to come forward with a few more homes or a few less, depending on how that plays out through the planning application process. And really it's then that thinking that has been brought forward to policy SP2. So it's built up from those sites and that approach really. But in the participant statement, it makes it clear it's certainly not held as a ceiling either at a site or a sub-regional, planned sub-area level, and the figures are in there that under the previous, or rather the current adopted plan, that also had an about approach, and yet the delivery figures have been exceeded using that. So it's not a ceiling. We just feel it's a better approach, a better way to describe the potential of each of the sub areas and of the development. Arguments about minima and why minima is not applicable. I mean, we've gone through housing numbers a couple of times and will again today, and yet we are not proposing the minimum level, for instance, identified through the standard method. There is an increase, and we'll get to a point of how much that is. But in terms of the plan approach, it has not been a minimum approach. Other thoughts may differ, but I don't think changing the word minimum, putting minimum in front of everything in front of this allocations and this policy would actually lead to better outcomes. I would just like to highlight as a point of detail, there are one or two allocations, I believe, in Colden Common, where due to the presence of heritage assets, that minimum would be an issue, and that about would absolutely be, I think they're cast as maxima. So that's an approach, just because the underlying evidence base relies on that approach, that it would be a mistake on that part. Only a couple, but just wanted to highlight that. Finally, if I may, the evidence base, in particular, I would say the transport, and leading on from that, the HRA has been set at a figure. If we were to start talking to Natural England about these are all minimum figures, I think there needs to be an element of certainty about how far are you exceeding and what are the implications for that. I know other plans have worded that and have used it, but still it seems to add an added level of uncertainty where there is none really. The existing approach of saying about has led to that target in the adopted plan being exceeded. So we think on balance this is the right way forward. Apologies for the long answer.
I get all of that. The thing is that the about could be less, could be more, couldn't it? And you're saying that's on a site specific basis based on the evidence on site. Okay, I understand. Mr. Fox.
Thank you. If I can just briefly add to what Mr. Alien said, I think it also comes back to work that we did with the local community about the design process. You'll see, and obviously we've got a separate session on high quality places and well designed places. And to tell you honestly, it was a light bulb moment really, where we said basically a good design for a site comes through a process, and that's integral in this local plan. We haven't done the work on a lot of the kind of layouts and things like that. That needs to come through the design process, and that's what we're promoting applicants to do. So hence why it reinforces the word about, because the design process should lead to the layout and the process, and you should go through that circular process of testing and refining and looking at the other objectives for the local plan. So the design process is an integral part of this local plan, which is why basically we are very keen to keep the word about, because the design process hasn't been undertaken and needs to be undertaken.
Okay. Could I ask anybody else want to comment on this? Blenheim?
Thank you. So yeah, we are actually of the view that it should be a minimum. We've already heard.
Sorry, throughout the plan generally, or SP2?
SP2.
SP2, and then what's your view across the plan generally?
I think expressed as minimums as well.
Okay.
We need to be hitting the target, and the about figure we've already heard. It indicates that there's probable risk to provide less. which clearly risks 5-year housing land supply issues in relation to deliverability, and further demonstrates that the local planning authority themselves aren't convinced that they've a sufficient supply available, otherwise would have set minimum as terminology within the plan, as opposed to the about wording. So I think a realistic target using minimum will avoid those 5-year housing land supply issues arising, and remove any concern around deliverability. We've heard that the master planning in relation to emerging allocations is work in progress, hasn't yet been completed, and with BNG and all sorts of other factors to consider as master planning evolves, there's more than likely going to be a decrease in yield than an increase in yield. That's my experience, and with a more aspirational approach using terminology minimum as opposed to about, we're sort of switching from a more sort of pessimistic form of terminology to positive form of terminology. After all, we're after an aspirational approach to this plan to deliver more, and having that minimum terminology will allow for infrastructure providers and also the authority through nitrate neutrality mitigation to plan for the minimum figure, which projecting forwards allows for potential headroom in relation to any potential windfall sites that then come forwards as well. Because with an about figure where we've got the flex of either increase or decrease, how can infrastructure providers plan for those windfall opportunities coming forwards above and beyond the figures that we're considering?
Okay, thank you. Foreman, Holmes.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on the point Mr. Ayling said about the Colden Common issue with the maximum figure, and Foreman homes have concerns about the maximum figure, but that will be picked up at the relevant hearing session.
Okay, thank you. Persimmon.
Thank you, Hannah Young for Persimmon. I think that the SP2 should be a minimum figure that sets out the needs for the borough. I think that would unequivocally say this is the minimum we're about to provide, and I think that should be clear and positive. That's not to say I think individual site allocations, I think there is an understanding that all gets developed through more detailed design. So I think that's reasonable to be about, but I think the strategic policy that sets out development needs should be minimum.
Okay, does one not feed into the other?
I think there's a element that some sites will potentially fall slightly below, but other sites would provide over, and you've got the greenfield sites as well and brownfield sites. So I think having a clear expectation at the outset that it's minimum provides all the certainty. I won't repeat what others have said, but provides the certainty.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think more of the issue to some degree is how the 5-year land supply does get looked at in the future, and particularly just also referencing to policy H1. But in terms of, again, the provision is expressed as about. So what does that mean on an annual basis of what we're measuring 5-year supply about? It does have to be a set figure. It does need to be a minimum. And I think even for the individual allocations, expressed as minimum does give the community and the communities within Winchester a clear understanding of what's going to be provided on those sites. Now, there may always be material considerations that can be taken into account as to why that number isn't achieved when you go through the design process, and that's fine. That's a normal part of the planning process at the development management stage. But I think expressing it as a minimum, in my experience, if they're not expressed as a minimum, then communities will ultimately absolutely hate the number of homes that are being proposed on a site. They will always want less. And so it's important to have that clear line in the sand and an understanding for the locals, and also an understanding for us to what we are measuring the housing land split 5-year requirement against. Without a minimum, we don't, if it's just about, well, what does that mean? 10% less, 20% less, 10% more, 20% more. It's just not clear as to what we're actually looking at.
Okay, thank you. So you've heard the point. Is there a role for completely get the design process that needs to be in place and the about figure for site allocation? Is there a role in strategic policies to state them as a minimum, bearing in mind government intention to supply of housing?
I think in terms of the, for instance, the application of 5-year supply and how we've been looking at that, certainly throughout the last few years in terms of the adopted approach, we've always adopted, if you like, that figure. You know, the adopted local plan has an about figure for the total number of homes there. That is our figure. We don't start to apply 5-year housing tests against a figure that varies in any way from that total, and that would be how we would apply it in this case. There's no, you know, we're not suggesting that we should be applying our delivery against any figure that varies from that at the plan level. I think for us, it's just a point of consistency with the way in which the allocations have been built up. I mean, we could talk about how we actually think that this is the minimum that's going to be delivered, with the fact that the plan has expressed additional sources of supply, such as through rural exception sites and all the rest of it. But frankly, we don't want or consider we need to go there, because we actually think that about is appropriate because of its consistency with the allocations, with the approach to allocations.
Do you take the point that was made that yes, you've got that design process in place, but it's most likely that some sites will over deliver, some will under deliver based on that design process?
It is likely that some will, and some will over, and some will under.
So is there any harm, therefore, in your strategic policies stating it is the minimum?
I think
that could be exceeded.
Yeah, I think the reality of it is it's probably, I can't see a lot of change in the way the plan is applied and the actual outcomes in what we're talking about. It's just really about the best, if you like, expression of what's in here. We think the 5-year supply test will be as per the figure that we end up with in the plan. It's more on balance. We think that the policy should be required, set out as about, because that's how we've come to this figure.
Okay, I've heard what you've said. I'll come to my own conclusions on that. Okay, Mr. Young.
Just on a practical level, about doesn't help anybody. I mean, there's no point saying about, and you know, it's always the case that sites might deliver more or less. I don't think that's a good argument for saying something as vague as about. Minimum, undoubtedly, leaving aside everything else, if you don't, what we may have is this plan continues on this artificially low number for 5 years. Then there's a local plan review that, like this one, takes 7 or 8 years. So now we're about 13, 15 years down the line. The council have been delivering according to this, well, largely because the sites have already got planning permission. And then what some local authorities have done in the past is introduce moratorium. They've introduced policies that effectively say, we've got enough houses, we've delivered enough houses. That's very, very attractive to local people. And so I spent part of my early career constantly defending Trafford Council, who introduced a moratorium and sought to stop development because the figure they said had been reached for Trafford. So in a policy environment of significantly boosting the supply, which we'll come on to, I'm sure, why would it not be a minimum? They should all be minimum.
Okay. Okay.
Just very briefly to respond to that last point, and again, I'm anxious you're not diverted by bizarre speculation, frankly, that we've just heard. The reality is that if the policy wording is about, there's no basis upon which a scheme would be turned down if it was in excess, if it was appropriately designed and sustainable and so forth, and was in excess of the about figure. There's no way in the overall context of what's going to be an ongoing desire to significantly boost the supply of housing, that a scheme would be turned down because it was in excess of the figure that's specified as the about figure. And so therefore, I'm not sure how much practical difference it really makes, but we've just found that's the better terminology, and the evidence shows that it hasn't been used as a vehicle for under-delivering.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Let's move on. Let's move on to the queries I've got on SP3. And of course, this is the policy that sets out what the provisions are in terms of development in the countryside. So the query that I have, paragraph 89, would it accord with paragraph 89, which states the use of previously developed lands and sites that are physically well related to existing settlements should be encouraged where suitable opportunities exist? Could I hear from the council on that point first, please?
So if I may, we recognise what the MPPF is saying there, and we look at SP3. We think that the criteria set out in SP3 are as close as we're at to the actual words in the MPPF. The criteria is particular criteria 3, but 1 to 5 really outline the circumstances in which additional growth can occur. I guess the only other thing I would add is the plan should be read as a whole, and it expressly policies such as well, really it's E9 allows for local growth to come forward in well-related locations in response to local needs. So we think that together we've got an approach that's there really in terms of what the MPPF is trying to achieve. So that's our position with why we think the plan is appropriately drafted.
What about criteria 3 that refers to proposals for the reuse of existing rural buildings for employment, tourist accommodation, community use, affordable housing, etc.?
Yeah. Well, we think actually this probably goes a little further than the MPPF in that the criteria 3 has the footnote 1, yes, which then talks about it's not just if you like adjacent, but also sites where you can get to are accessible through a range of transport, and therefore we do think it provides the flexibility, which is the aim of the MPPF in trying to find those employment sites. I absolutely recognise that this is talking about reuse. When we're talking about new land, new opportunities coming forward, that's really where policy E9 comes in, which is about then with reference to local need. But we think that if it is the right location, that should be a test that proposals should be able to pass in any event. Okay. But that's where we're at.
In referring to buildings as opposed to sites or land?
Yes, we because the main aim of criteria 3, it's aimed at really reuse of previously developed land. We appreciate the use of sites has been mentioned by a participant and with the MPPF. The issue with us with that is that if we talk about a rural site, it's just really ensuring that there's a distinction, because a rural site could be a greenfield site as well as any other. And it's just whether or not we've really got that balance right with what's permissible and what isn't. Therefore, we think that we're trying to focus criteria 3 on previously developed site land, although it talks about buildings, whereas E9 is far more open in that it's a greenfield and brownfield approach where that local need can be demonstrated.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have a question on that?
Ma'am,
Heritage
Ed
Kate?
Heron, on behalf of Heritage Property. Um, I think we've heard already today about, from Mr. Young about this being more of an audit for the plan. And I think from the perspective of this policy, it is more prescriptive and restrictive than it is perhaps positive. This is a clear departure away from the breadth of paragraph 89 and seeks to impose restrictions that the NPPF clearly didn't, and without justification. I think certainly when you look at bullet point three, the third paragraph of the restrictions, it introduces a level of restrictions on the proposed uses on the previously developed land that the NPPF doesn't, and I don't see justification for doing that.
Mr. Gately?
Thank you, Matt. It's not to prolong this question, but in your question, you ask whether the policy should explicitly recognise the sustainability of locations immediately adjacent to settlement boundaries, and we obviously think the answer to that is yes, especially where settlements are at the top of the hierarchy, such as Winchester, and there would be modifications that could be proposed to that effect. I would just draw a comparison with a policy in Wiltshire, policy 64, which relates to employment land, but which provides a comparison as to where there is a need or an appropriate site. They potentially within their local plan would permit employment development adjacent to major principal settlements as an example of how that approach has been taken. It's currently being examined.
Sorry, would you mind using the microphone, Mr.
Yeah,
Gately?
so the reference I'm making is policy 64 in the
Wiltshire plan,
Wiltshire plan, and where they have a series of settlements, in this case Salisbury and a couple of others in that county, which are preeminently greater than other settlements. There's a status given to development around those locations, even if they are formally defined as countryside, but recognising that's a blunt tool, binary, you're either in or you're out, and providing some flexibility in that respect.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. At the back of the room, it's actually quite difficult to hear. Would the people at the back of the room speak right into their microphones? Sorry, Blenheim?
Thank you. I'll make sure to speak quite directly if you can hear me.
Thank you.
Really.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for the comments before as well. I do like to go on to that point as well, that that policy should be or provide some flexibility as well. It is a fairly restrictive policy. The way I see the policy is as being a bit of a parachute for if there are 5-year housing land supply issues, if there are concerns about deliverability, which we've heard today to some degree. So on that policy, I had suggested in my hearing statement as well to provide some flexibility to allow for greenfield development that could be sustainably located adjacent to settlements. And I find the reference to the Wiltshire plan interesting, as that had been a source of well, one of my sources to look into providing a bit more flexibility for that policy, because currently the policy also relates to central rural exception sites. I am aware that RPs are currently struggling with grants as well, so I don't know how much housing will come forward under that policy. And in light of the concerns that we have on the overall sort of deliverability of the supply, I do think that this policy should provide more flexibility to allow for development to come forward, but only on the proviso that there are 5-year housing land supplies issues down the line.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Belway?
Thank you, Ma'am. Just a quick reference back to policy T1, which Belway absolutely support, which is the encouragement of 20-minute neighbourhoods. Now, we're only really going to have this if we look at sites on the edge of settlements, and at the moment, local plan fails to do so. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. so we've moved on to a question that I didn't ask actually, but people have made comment on it, and therefore I'd like the council's response. So it's about the restriction of SP3, and of course it defines development in the countryside as land outside the settlement. And is it too restrictive? You've heard the comments, and that's the nub of my question when I asked it. And you said, can you go beyond read the plan as a whole? Because of course, you know, that there are a number of other policies that will control this.
Yes, although I will refer to other policies, but yes.
I thought you would.
Yeah. We think that the plan does actually have a lot, it offers a lot of mechanisms where development in the countryside can be considered. It is not a countryside equals no. There are policies about farm diversification, expansion of large employers in the countryside, an exception policy for rural affordable housing, a new approach that is not in the adopted plan on allowing economic growth in response to local need with local business under E9. And there is also obviously a range of uses that are allowed in the countryside, which is a pretty standard approach. So we think actually by being clear on how those varying proposals will be assessed, forgive the agricultural workers as another, but you know, there are being clear about how those proposals be assessed is better than having a more general, you know, we will look at each case on its merits. There is merit in giving certainty for communities and all parties with what the countryside means in an adopted plan context, and then what we would consider in terms of an appropriate development within it and what needs to be addressed.
Okay, so you're referring to H4, H7, H12,
yes,
E9, E11, those.
Yes, listed in the participant statement.
Yeah.
Apologies.
Yeah, I get that. Does anybody else want to say anything on that? Okay, so let's move on. Does policy SP3 provide particular locational needs of essential infrastructure such as water and wastewater? I think this we should be able to deal with fairly quickly. Could I put it to the council, please? You've suggested some MMs.
Yes,
and they're fairly. Sorry, carry on.
No, I'm afraid I lost the document on my laptop for a moment. Yes, so there are proposed modifications to policy SP3 arising from comments received from statutory agencies and from Southern Water, particular highlighting quite rightly the fact that essential infrastructure is appropriate use in the countryside, as Southern Water's key point. From the statutory agencies, it was about they were seeking tweaks to recognise the potential for flood risk and also address any potential loss of best and most versatile agricultural land. And that's been the motivation for proposed modifications PM4 and 5.
Mm-hmm. Okay, does anybody have any query on that? Okay. I don't need any further help on that. Thank you. So I do have a query that I wanted to go back to on what the implications, as I said, you know, if the plan on the plan start date, and if I were to come to the conclusion that that wasn't justified, what would be the council's response? I think that's quite a tall order for poor old Mr. Sorry, how do you pronounce it? Object to go away and do that work. Why don't we say, you know, if I leave the council to think about, that's a knotty issue that I'm sure you've been thinking about over the last couple of months. Think about that. We'll probably be picking up on it again this afternoon, but I don't want to rehearse. I don't want to rehearse all those arguments. So maybe the best thing to do is to ask you to think about that, and in the next day or two, put a paper together explaining, if I were to come to that conclusion, what your response would be. I mean, we've heard from around the table, various people have suggested various start dates, but I want the council to think about that and think what would be the most appropriate way forward. I want to be very clear, I have not come to a conclusion on this point. I'm raising concern, and I need to be I need to be persuaded on it. Okay. Is there anything else that anybody wishes to raise?
Can I just raise a question on timetabling?
Yes, of course.
It's only because what I suspect is a misprint in the agenda that came out last night. The agenda seems to suggest that matter 5 would start at 10 o'clock on tomorrow morning. Whereas I had imagined that, I think the original timetable provided that matter 4 would take this afternoon and this morning.
Sorry, where's that?
If you look at the agenda for matter 5, it suggests it starts at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Yeah. Sorry, on Thursday morning. Thursday afternoon. Yeah.
So we are still intending to run matter 4 over this afternoon and tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes. I mean, the way to deal with it, we'll deal with need this afternoon. We'll deal with supply tomorrow morning.
Perfect.
We'll get that corrected.
Thank you very much.
And then we'll deal with the site allocation methodology. I mean, in dealing with supply, until we've gone through, I don't want to do it in 2 tranches, until we've gone through the detail of, you know, developability, deliverability on each site. Actually, we can't come to a definite conclusion on supply, but we can, you know, flag up the headlines, can't we, as we go through all of them, particularly those sites. I can't remember, are they H and I can't remember what.
I'm assuming that the sessions we have programmed in for Winchester Town, South Hampshire urban area, and the Market Towns rural area, they will be the sessions at which we consider the details of each site in terms of deliverability.
Exactly.
Supply on tomorrow morning will be a more general consideration.
Exactly.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll get that corrected. Okay. Thank you very much. 12:15. This hearing is closed and will open again at 2 o'clock. Thank you.